Hi there, my name is Philip Eidson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the podcast, I'd like to share with you a live session from a recent event that we hosted with LevaData called Navigating the Decision Abyss, Managing Direct Spend in Chaotic Times. Now, this event covered a number of live sessions covering direct material decision intelligence. As someone who spent a number of years in the automotive industry as a direct materials buyer, these are topics that I really enjoyed digging into. And the entire event is available to watch again, free of charge, by clicking on the link in the show notes of today's podcast. Now, the session I'm sharing today features LevaData CEO Keith Hartley and Lance Younger, an AOP alumni and now CEO of ProcureTech. In this conversation, we focused on understanding what data and intelligence is required to improve decision-making in these chaotic times. Now, I start by asking Keith, did he find procurement or did procurement find him?
I think procurement found me. You know, my career in enterprise software has spanned several decades. And predominantly I came to procurement through ERP and all things supply chain, which I've played in for the past 15 years. So I would say procurement found me, and it's been a joy and a pleasure to serve procurement professionals, both originally on the indirect side earlier in my career and now on the direct side. So understanding their pain and what they go through as practitioners. I'd say it found me.
And Lance, the same question to you.
Yeah, not unlike yourself, Phil. Actually, I think I found procurement, but in the automotive industry. I started my life as a production purchasing buyer in the northeast of England with Nissan. Was there for 5-6 years, buying everything from steering gear through to engine mountings and rubber seals and tires and everything as well. And way back, introduced the first procurement performance management system for vendors as well. And some things have changed, and some things haven't.
Isn't that the case? No, I was automotive as well first with plastic components, then electromechanical and lighting, all these things I had no idea about whatsoever when I started. But I always found it a real thrill to be responsible for components like that within the automotive space.
Yeah.
Now, Keith, you have coined this phrase "decision abyss," and we've used this throughout, kind of in the titles of of all of our sessions and the event today. Now, just to get everybody kind of on the same page, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what this term "decision abyss" means to you.
Yeah, I came up with this concept of the decision abyss after talking to a lot of chief supply chain officers, senior folks in supply chain, and procurement on the direct materials side. So direct material sourcing, global commodity managers. And after speaking to a lot of people in manufacturing, I realized that this decision abyss exists. So the decision abyss is where the supply chain, and particularly the supply chain planning organization, does not have visibility and a tool to collaborate with direct material sourcing. And so that goes both ways. If you look inside of companies today, a lot of large, sophisticated manufacturing operations, there will be different divisions operating or one division, and there's limited visibility, collaboration, and communication between the supply chain function and the direct materials, in particular, the sourcing function. So when I say decision abyss, what really matters for companies is making better decisions. And, the underpinning of why historically there's been a decision abyss is because there is not good, clean, easy to understand data that can drive informed, cross-functional decision making.
Yeah.
Both procurement and supply chain have operated in silos, and so this notion of a decision abyss exists and hampers companies' ability to make quick decisions, more rapid decisions, more informed decisions, and actually better decisions when they're buying their direct materials for their manufacturing arms. So for me, the decision abyss is really something that we at LevaData are going after and addressing to help bridge this collaboration and communication and visibility of direct material sourcing information along with the supply chain folks at companies.
Now, do you see that manifesting itself both in new product development and in kind of ongoing business operations, or is it one over the other? I'd love to see kind of understand at what kind of points between that interaction this decision abyss exists, or is it across all points of interaction?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's across all points. I would say new product introduction, new product adoption, being able to look at bills of materials and products at the part level and understanding what the cost and risk are. We do that all day long. And so using that information on new products is incredibly valuable. At the same token, oftentimes large manufacturing companies have disparate pockets of data on existing products, and they have parts and ingredients, and they have prices on these things, and they don't know if they're getting a good deal or bad deal. They don't know if the price they paid last year is a good price or a bad price. So this decision abyss is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where siloed organizations, whether it's supply chain planning or direct material sourcing, what happens is you end up in that silo doing your job using limited data. And today's sourcing professional is under incredible pressure from the Office of Finance, from the supply chain folks at their company, and from supplier pressure with everything going on in the world. So the aperture that we at LevaData have to help the direct material sourcing agent is really critical to enable these people in direct material sourcing to do their job better. They are underserved and don't have sort of that underlying data aperture to be able to drive visibility and collaboration with their supply chain brothers and sisters in the organization. So this decision abyss applies to all products, existing products, run rate products, and as well as bill of materials, both on the run rate, manufacturing BOMs, e-BOMs, everything. So if it is a product and it is being built or has been built, there is part level insight. That sort of data and thinking can help, bridge the decision abyss.
So I want to bring in a poll that we did in advance. And Lance, I'm going to put you on notice that I'm going to ask you about this first. But let me bring in the poll results. So we asked to the Art of Procurement community in advance of today's session a question. I'm going to read this out in its entirety in case folks are listening on a podcast later, for example, versus watching. The question was, my organization most often finds ourselves in a decision abyss when we, and the top response was don't have detailed data, 50% of respondents, lack predictive market insight, which is 22% of responses, struggle to forecast demand, which is 16% of responses, and do all of our analysis in spreadsheets, which is 13% of responses. Lance, I want to come to you and just get some perspectives on if those results surprise you or not.
Yeah, I mean, they don't surprise me. And just a little bit building on what Keith said is that, data now for organizations is more complex, it's more expansive. And Keith referenced this aperture. For procurement, historically, people have been going deep. They've been going deep in the spend kind of aperture and arguably have said, well, I don't have enough data when it comes to basically going deep to understand what I spend. But now when you look across the supply chain, especially in basically the direct space, you need to be able to connect the data, widen the aperture to basically fully understand what the problems are. And so you have this kind of magnification as one, you don't have the data, then you don't have the market insights, and you don't have the forecast information, which just compound the problem. When it comes to this decision abyss. The second thing as well that's really, really important here is that ultimately, the decisions and the lack of decisions lead to lack of action. And that's the magnification of what we're doing here as well, because often and ironically, people work the other way around, that they're very good at doing, but arguably that they're not doing the right things because they don't have the right data to inform what they should be doing. So this decision abyss has a magnifying effect,
Keith, any thoughts? Because I think that's really important about taking action, because
Yeah.
ultimately this is what everything has to drive, and there's no lack of will to against taking action. It's taking the right actions.
Yeah, when I see this poll, it's sad to me, and it validates kind of my thinking, which is the direct materials sourcing professional has been historically underserved, and they're being asked to do more with less. They're being asked to make better, smarter decisions without being informed, without having detailed data, without having predictive insights, and to continue doing it in spreadsheets. So it makes me sad and opportunistic at the same time, because with LevaData, we have the data aperture that drives improvement in these behaviors and drives the offline nature to an online nature. So it validates what we're doing, but it disheartens me, because every procurement professional that I talk to, when we show the power of what we're doing with our data aperture, it allows them to do their job better. And they're being asked to do a really critically hard job right now in the world. And so it's exciting to see when we're able to help this audience of sourcing professionals.
And Lance, is this something that you see across all the organizations that you talk to, that this gap exists? Still, as you say, a lot of years ago when you were involved in the automotive, and same for me, where this gap existed, here we are, 2023. Is this a pain that's still being felt by a lot of the companies that you talk to?
Yes, but I still think there's a maturity. Organizations are going through kind of various stages. One, as your poll calls out, get hold of the data, then aggregate it, then visualize it, then do something with it. So make some decisions with that data. And depending on the organization, the level of maturity, the capability, the tooling that exists, people are at different stages. What one of the upsides of the pandemic and the various supply chain threats that we've had is that it's created a spotlight on one, the problem, but also the potential and the way that things can be solved, and the importance of making those decisions as well. I would also say, a little bit of reference to one of the sessions you've got later on around cost, is that the traditional realizing of cost benefits by just analyzing your spend and basically aggregating and looking for common areas of spend or aggregating. That was so 90s. That was Phil. That was you and I were doing that in the 90s. Whereas now you have to aggregate, price indices, information, incorporate your carbon footprint, et cetera, to be able to do that negotiation. So decision intelligence, is going to enable you to access new areas of cost reduction as an example.
Yeah, there's the decisions need to be made across multiple dimensions, as opposed to, perhaps traditionally it would be just a cost, or even before it was just a price-based decision. Keith, what are the kind of sources of data that you're able to bring in, or that you look to bring in, to help organizations make better decisions?
Yeah, we aggregate dozens of data sources, along with customer data, pricing data, and the notion that we know a lot more about a part or ingredient than most companies. We deliver and serve that up in software so that the sourcing professional can look by product, by part, by ingredient, and where there is cost savings that they can realize in the market, and also where there's risk at the part level.
Yeah.
So we historically, there are a lot of sort of supplier risk companies out there that do risk adjustment at the supplier level. We do it at the part level, because it's my belief that if you are not risk adjusting part by part, then your supply chain is exposed, because just one part can cause you not to be able to deliver a product or a set of products. So our fundamental, core tenet of our company is we're going to know everything there is to know about a part, and we're going to ingest as much data as possible and deliver this up in an easy to understand format so that the sourcing professional can be even more valuable to their organization. So with all things COVID and all things going on in the world, the sourcing professional is brutally important to their organization. If they don't have a tool like LevaData where they can actually spend time and figure out how to make better decisions, it's a hard battle to try to win that just with a spreadsheet or a phone call or talking with the supplier. So I really do empathize with the professional today who's out there trying to drive value for their company without really good data sets. And it's taken LevaData years to develop our aperture. This is really hard stuff. This is not something someone can go grab 5 or 6 data sources and try to blend it. It's very difficult to do this type of work. So, you have to have a kind of a big data mindset and skill set to be able to aggregate all this data and make sense of it and deliver it to users.
So I have a couple of questions that have come in. First, I'm going to pose this one to you, Keith, but Lance, feel free as well to jump in. The question is, Keith mentioned data silos. This was earlier. Can a decision abyss be caused by internal complexity as well as external data?
I mean, 100%, absolutely. The internal complexity is oftentimes, and it is oftentimes a big driver of this decision abyss. The supply chain planning folks that I've spent, a lot of years with will typically figure out their forecast and just slam the forecast on the direct material sourcing team without visibility into parts which go into products. And without that level of visibility, there's no language to talk other than what our forecast is, the product we build. So if you're not using, and so my sort of call out to everyone who's in sourcing and supply chain is, how do you define a language? How do you define rules and a language by which to communicate with in your company? That internal complexity is massive. And so that's one hurdle. The second hurdle is, there are always reasons suppliers are trying to up prices. And if you don't have good contextualized data, part by supplier, then you don't have a negotiation strategy by which to go back to that supplier every year or twice a year, whatever your re-up cycle is, to be able to negotiate better prices. So internal complexity is every bit as important to traverse the decision abyss as the external complexity that I see.
And it's one of those things as well where if you're not careful, you start the journey based upon a need, an instant requirement. It might be an issue, might be some form of challenge, but if you're fundamentally, your data model and data architecture and nomenclature that Keith refers to isn't set up in the right way, you can end up creating more complexity in the long term by what you try and do in the short term. So we often, basically have to stop clients from running ahead to solve things because they need to sort out the data fabric and how that's structured in the right way so that you end up in the right place down the line.
That's a great point, Lance. And I would just say, I talk to a lot of prospects and a lot of customers, and I ask them usually a simple question, do you use data to make decisions? And inevitably 100% of the time, if I were to take a poll, the answer is yes. And when I dig into that, it's usually a data source or two, and then they know what they bought last year. And my sort of proposition is it's not enough, that you need more blended contextualized data to be able to drive that decision, because it takes dozens of data points and contextualize risk elements and attributes along with cost elements and attributes that you need to be able to know whether you're getting a good deal part by part, whether there's availability, and how you satiate the number or the product requests coming over from the supply chain team. So these are, sourcing people are very smart. They're very data driven, but it's been my finding that they need more data contextualization and data blending, because there are a lot more data sources out there than what most sourcing professionals are using.
So I acknowledge I'm probably asking you a question which takes an hour to answer and asking you to answer it in 5 minutes. And it's like the $64,000 question. But so how do we do it? How can if people are listening and they're kind of resonating and nodding their head and saying, yeah, that's kind of the situation that I find myself in, what can they do to start turning the corner and changing that decision intelligence that they have access to? And Keith, I'm sorry, I pose that to you.
I wanted to see if Lance would answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, look, for me, it's about, change takes time, but I fundamentally believe organizations and people in direct material sourcing are ready to evolve and take kind of a crawl, walk, run strategy with using data as a language. So to me, getting started on this journey for all the practitioners that are out there is critically important. To having a well thought out partner like LevaData or someone to develop a data aperture that lets you start blending more data, looking at more data, and being more informed. And that'll just drive your decision making. Mm-hmm. So decision making is the sort of output from really good, clean, contextualized data. So for me, having that data as a language allows you to be even more important in your organization with supply chain people and to actually come together at the table and communicate and collaborate with others around the organization. And it also gives you kind of that lighthouse for who you're going to be as an organization. You're going to be a value add organization that uses data and good, clean, contextualized data to drive value. And that is a message that resonates with everybody inside of an organization. So it's good, clean data, which will drive better decision making. That's how you traverse the decision base.
Lance, any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, no, I kind of echo it, to reinforce the why. It's Harvard Business Review, Forbes, others have done research that kind of say, if you're doing decision intelligence well, you're going to end up twice as more likely to be in the top quartile from a financial perspective, but you're also going to be 5 times quicker as well, which is a key thing coming back to this kind of drives actions. I do agree, like any good sort of change management program, it's identifying some of the quick wins you can get which are driving to the value, whether it's you're focused around a particular risk situation or otherwise. And then putting in place the fundamentals. What we experience with both digital and data solutions that we select and put in for organizations, ultimately that's probably 20% of the solution, whether it's you're looking at it financially or time wise. The rest comes down to kind of a shift from mindset of the leaders and engagement of the leaders all the way through to the capability of the teams to be able to use the tools as well. And then the second one is capacity, because funnily enough, the capacity might not be there because it doesn't exist or because they're currently doing their day job. And unfortunately, there almost needs to be an unfreezing of things and then a refreeze or some kind of shock moment that basically creates that impetus. Otherwise, you'll not end with a step change. You end up with an incremental change to realize these benefits that I talked about before.
Yeah, and if I may, Phil, just following on what Lance said, I'm old enough to remember when software was, you'd go off and build it and ingest data and spend 2 years before you delivered something to a customer. The benefit of cloud and AI and all of the algorithmic things that we're doing at LevaData is that we go live quickly, and we believe in this crawl, walk, run, because it is a process change. It is a business workflow change. The user changes when they start to use data. So we ingest billions of spend under management and are able to show insights and value within 2 months. So, and then we begin that change management and that mindset and that cultural shift, because Lance brings up a really good point. That's the part that you really have to find a partner who understands that journey, because just delivering data isn't enough. You have to understand it. It has to be contextualized to the part level. And then you have to, understand what action you can take, how to take action, and how to use data. So I like to say aspirationally that we're changing how direct material sourcing does their job, and we're really proud of that. It's a process.
Yeah.
But the data aperture that we go live with is in 2 months, not 2 years. So it's a very exciting time, I believe, to be in this profession and to embrace the use of data to get through the abyss.
Do you find from an implementation perspective, there's somewhat of a, because you said kind of starting with the crawl, it's, you can't visualize the art of the possible until you start to see what is possible. And so once you start to see what's possible, it's then, and that's kind of where the crawl comes in, it's then, okay, wow, now if I compound that across a variety of different dimensions, then I can start to see what might be possible through this that I couldn't see before.
Yeah, there's nothing I love more when someone says, I want to see what a part that I care about. Show me what kind of insights you can drive. And we welcome that. Actually, I want to know parts or products that people care about, and I can show them what we have built and what kind of insights we can do. So I actually encourage and welcome that type of interaction with LevaData, because to me, that's where the proverbial rubber hits the road, is when you see it in a part or a set of parts that you care about, the level of insight and detail that's delivered in an easy to understand way. You can't turn back. You can't, once you've seen it, you can't turn away from it, because it really helps you do your job.
Yeah. I think that there's an interesting thing here as well. I mean, I'm lucky enough in the role we have is that we see thousands of different digital solutions, and the sort of the level of maturity is often driven by the need, if that makes sense. And going back to the analogy I talked about before, this whether it's data visibility, data aggregation, and then basically decision intelligence on top of that, the majority of solutions in the marketplace are doing data aggregation and visualization. And then it's across all domains, by the way, all domains. And then you have a few solutions that basically give you that it might be the insights, it might be the recommendations, it might be autonomous, because it's feeding the next step in the process. But when you have that, I'll echo what Keith says. There's an aha moment from the users, and it's twofold, by the way. There's a double-edged sword, and Keith might not like what I'm about to say, but I think you will. One is, that's awesome. You know what I mean? It's making these sorts of recommendations, but you sometimes get the kind of, should we trust that, or do we trust our buyers to just ignore this? So there's a careful balance there of the capability being able to meet what the tools or the best-in-class tools can actually do.
Now we have probably 3 or 4 minutes left. And I do want to ask, Lance, you've been running a survey in conjunction with LevaData to dig down a little bit more into this topic and kind of where the community is on decision intelligence. I know that the study is actually ongoing, so I'll actually share a way for folks to engage in that study afterwards, as I think it's got a few more weeks that it's open. But what are some of the initial findings that you've, as you look into that data that you have that's coming already from that survey?
No, great. Thanks, Phil. I mean, it's a great piece of research, to be quite honest, to be able to understand, what decision intelligence is, what are the drivers, what capabilities do you need, where it's best applied, and ultimately, what are the results as well. So by completing the survey, yes, we're going to share that with everybody. We're also able to do a little bit of a benchmark against where you are at the minute in terms of application. So it's quite powerful. Open for another couple of weeks as well, which would be great if people get the chance to participate in it. But no surprise, we're actually seeing 85% of respondents so far are saying that decision intelligence has a significant impact, on their end-to-end capabilities as well. Challenges, a little bit similar to the ones you did in your SNAP poll, but also that the integration of data basically is important, as Keith called out right at the start, to really get this compound effect as well. And then a few other things coming out in terms of where value can be delivered as well. But I'll hold those back for the survey when it's completed as well, so that people can see some new stuff. But it's going to be good, and we'll comprise all the survey together, send that out, and run a couple of webinars off the back of that as well.
All right, well, I encourage anybody who can, submit their answers to that survey to get as complete a data kind of picture as possible, because I think it's really interesting. And then again, to drive actions. Okay, now you can benchmark where you are, use that as a guide to then determining what actions to take. I do just want to, because I've probably got time for one quick question. Want to jump on what you said about integration. And perhaps, Keith, I'll ask you, because you're involved in a lot of implementations. How much of the organization do you have to bring to the table to be able to implement the technology to drive, this aperture that we've talked about? Is it bringing IT, supply chain, procurement, other elements? What do you kind of see as best practice?
Yeah, typically we need data. And so the owners of the data in many organizations are IT and perhaps supply chain. So we need data loads, and we load the data and give insight, and then we refresh that over time. So we found that many companies that start with LevaData, they don't have an issue getting data from their internal stakeholders.
Yeah.
It's actually when procurement comes to the table and says, we're going to change, we're going to use data at the forefront of how we make decisions. The rest of the organization is actually on board. And so they're willing to give data. Now, what happens and why it's important to pick a partner like LevaData is that contextualizing that data and making sense of it, not all data is clean. It requires a real data company, because the aggregation is just, that's the beginning. It's how you drive insights on top of that data and what you do from good, clean data. And that's the process that we've invested years of R&D and development into, so that we can make sense of these very large, very complex, some structured, some unstructured data sets. It's a really hard problem that we're addressing, and hence why it has created this abyss, because that underlying data structure can be quite intimidating. And so that's what we at LevaData try to fill. The procurement professional, when they go to their organization, to their finance organization, to the supply chain organization, even to their internal, the procurement organization, and they say, we want to use data and an aperture to make better, smarter, more informed decisions. Almost across the board, it's been a resounding hallelujah. It's been a good moment for these people. So, usually IT, supply chain is who owns some of the data.
It's a compelling pitch, for sure. Well, I know that I've got to wrap up there. So, Keith and Lance, I want to thank you so much.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.